Good evening. Welcome to the April 14th school board meeting. Meeting has been properly posted. Ms. Larson, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Gamble.
Here.
Mrs. Witkowski. Here. Mr. Alexandrovich.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Mr. Sprague.
Here.
Mrs. Sapersky. Here. We are all present.
Thank you. Would you please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Witkowski,
Second.
second by Mr. Sprague. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, community comment. Participants need to come forward to the mic and state your name and address. Statements are limited to 3 minutes with a maximum of 15 minutes for any and all comments. If the community comment is related to an agenda item, the board may respond to that comment either at the end of the community comment session or during the discussion of that agenda item. The board may not discuss a comment or question that does not relate to an agenda item or board policy administrative rule 8300. Would anyone like to make a community comment? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Step to the microphone.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you understand it. I can't hear you back here, and I don't even know if this thing's working correctly.
Yes, sir. It's on.
Well, how come I can't hear you? You don't get up to the mic. I told you that a couple of times before. Well, anyway, in regards to the school district, I'm still looking forward to seeing something done about the parking on 83rd Street. Ben Franklin School. That's horrible, and nobody seems to want to do about it. Also, that Southview should be opened up. And today, I was driving down 112th Street. I couldn't imagine that the school bus was letting the children out at every home. In my neighborhood, the boy and a couple of kids that get out of the bus, they have to walk a half a block or so to get to their house. What is the issue? I mean, if we're going to have the children bring home safely and you can dump them off right at the front of the house on 112th, they're not doing it in the city. I mean, whatever you call it, the city of Franklin is out at 112th Street, is it not? So that's it. And then since my neighborhood is getting kind of crowded with young children, it's kind of nice to see them. But why are you putting those heavy packs on those young children that are about that big? They can hardly walk. What is so important to take home? Where's the physical problems that will be created by this? Where's the health department to stop this kind of stuff? I'm getting old, but you people sure don't look forward to what a decent school district. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to make a comment? Anyone else want to make a comment? Hearing none, community comments are closed. Are there any announcements from our school board members? Hearing none, I'll move on to item 6, the school board calendar. Board of Education Coherence Plan Workshop will be April 28th at the ECC at 6 p.m. Regular Board of Education meeting on April 28th at the ECC at 7 p.m. And a regular Board of Education meeting on May 12th at the ECC at 6 p.m. Item 7, our district administrator's update. Dr. Miller.
Good evening. You hear me, Leroy? You hear me? Hopefully. Thank you. I'm pleased to share that the COVID cases have remained low. We, however, are still within a 2-week period post-spring break where it's possible that we may see some more cases. Our statewide assessments are well underway. We have over 2,000 students who've begun testing this April. Our virtual students are coming to our schools to take their assessments, and things are going very well. We're optimistic about what our results will look like, given our ability to maintain our high expectations for learning in our schools this year. Results from our spring assessments become available to the district in late summer, and then of course we have our annual assessment report in December. I'd like to welcome our newly elected board members, Maksud Khan. He's here this evening. Would you stand, Maksud? Welcome. Ann Sapersky, yes, let's clap. Ann Sapersky. And Angela Beer. Congratulations. Our new board members will be seated at the full board meeting on April 28th. I would also like to sincerely thank 2 of our board members who will be ending their service to the board. Mr. Larry Gamble, who has served on the board since February 2017 and has served as the president of the board since 2020. And Mr. Claude Lewis, who has served on the board since April of 2018. During that time, Mr. Gamble and Mr. Lewis have provided leadership in the district and have supported the implementation of a coherence plan to ensure the growth and achievement of our students, the opening of this beautiful new middle school, the initiation of a 4K program, the purchase of land for future growth in the school district. As board members, they have reviewed over 100 policies pertaining to the school district. And as members of our entire staff, they have focused on learning about equity and how we can get better as a district. Finally, Mr. Gamble and Mr. Lewis have served our school district in navigating a worldwide pandemic, ensuring a safe and high-quality experience for our children. Mr. Gamble and Mr. Lewis have served their community and its future as board members. To recognize this commitment, I'd like to present to both of them a certificate of commendation, from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards and a plaque which states, "In recognition of your contribution," you can't read it off of there, "to the Franklin Public School District. Thank you for your support of excellence in student achievement, continuous improvement, and active partnerships with our Franklin families and community members." So I have for you, Mr. Gamble. Our entire board is grateful for your service, and at this time, a few board members would like to share a few words of thanks. So I'll turn it over to our board members.
Claude, I will miss your contagious smile and sense of humor at our meetings, your know-how, and leading questions. I may even miss hearing you and Mike discuss golf. And I hope for Mike's sake, someone else is able to talk golf with him. I must say, I will not miss your constant pen clicking. All kidding aside, thank you for your work on the board and your dedication to students, staff, and our community. And Larry, thank you for sharing this adventure with us. And I refer to your time on the board as an adventure because during our time together, you've shared so many adventures that you've really had with us, like flying and photography and travel and your work with some of our forgotten heroes, our veterans. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with us. Thank you for your calm, gentle manner. You've got a quick smile that makes it easy for nerves just to melt away. Please think not only of the board, but of the whole Franklin community as you begin your next big adventure in your new home, your new state, and that all-important new climate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
Yes, I also would like to thank you for your service to the board to move Franklin Public Schools forward. You listened and learned to be a team member and found your way to contribute. Larry, you moved the district out of its comfort zone to reach out to state legislators to change the reporting of students in correctional facilities. While we do a great job with these students, they spend little time with us and should not be included with our overall K-12 report card. While we are local, our parents are mobile, and we must put our best data forward when parents are evaluating their options. And Claude, your perspective as a result of your experience in human resources will be missed. Public education is a people business, and the board needs to be focused on our staff performance and cost. I hope you all find a way to stay connected and wish you all well.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Larry and Claude also. Both of them are practical. They thought of the children first and then the district. You could see in their actions how seriously they took their work here on the board. And I am honored to have this time with you on the board. And I'm probably a better person for it also, so thank you. Claude was also influential in bringing self-insurance to our health plan. I was very much in favor of that also. And it's been a pleasure, so thank you.
Thank you.
I've served on the board with Claude for 2 years, and I'm proud to call him a friend. His human resources background has given the board a unique perspective, especially with regard to personnel matters. His fiscal conservatism and leadership helped hold the line on property taxes, especially during these tough times. He was also integral in pushing to get kids back in school this year where they belong. Thank you for your leadership and service, Mr. Lewis. Larry served the school district admirably for the last 4 years and served his country for longer. His dedication has brought Assembly Bill 908 close to the finish line, and his dedication to the school board and the Franklin community are much appreciated. Thank you for your leadership and service, Mr. Gann.
Thank you.
As the newest member of the board, I haven't had as long to work with you as board members. However, as a parent involved in the board for the last number of years, I appreciate your willingness to listen to outside opinions and communicate with the community. And now, having worked with you on the board, I really appreciate your welcoming nature, especially to somebody who is coming in kind of in an odd situation. I appreciate your support as we navigated that, and I'm glad that I got a chance to work with you even for a short amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
Did you want to make any comments, Claude?
I'm good. Man, a few words.
Yeah, this is my final meeting as a member of the Franklin School Board, and as in the comments, it has been a very interesting time, but it's also been a great pleasure to serve as a representative for the citizens of Franklin, and also to work with dedicated members of the board and the professional leaders that we have in our school district. And I wish everyone the best, and for our students and our teachers and administrators the same, and to keep up the good work. Thank you. Item 8 will be reports, presentations, and other school board business. First is our Friends of Franklin recognition, Mr. Sprague and Dr. Miller.
Come a little, oh. You can hear me, right? So I'm just coming a little closer here. Okay, so for our first nomination, I'm going to call up Lori O'Neill because she nominated an individual who unfortunately isn't here this evening, but I do want Lori to acknowledge this person publicly and share a little bit more about why she nominated this person for the Friends of Franklin.
So I'm nominating Rob Krieger from Crohn's Incorporated, who generously reached out to the district around Thanksgiving to see how he could support our work during this unprecedented time with a donation of additional and very valuable PPE, personal protective equipment. So we communicated with Rob, and we were so grateful that he generously donated thousands of KN95 masks to the district. So we are incredibly thankful for Rob Krieger and Crohn's for their generous donation.
And Lori's kind enough to take that on behalf of Crohn's and Rob. Thank you. All right, so I'm extremely honored to be recognizing the Franklin Educational Foundation this evening and its community members who invested deeply and caringly in our schools for 25 years. So I've been around that long, so actually been around the entire time that the foundation has been existed. And I personally have seen what they have done over the years, and it's remarkable. So when I heard it was 25 years, first of all, I could hardly believe that much time has passed, but what a commitment and the things they've done. For the last 25 years, the Franklin Educational Foundation has raised almost $1.4 million for Franklin Public Schools, covering approximately 153 classroom grants. In the past 5 years, they've evolved from only providing classroom grants to offering graduating senior scholarships, educator awards, and establishing a student emergency fund. They've worked tirelessly to host various small and large-scale fundraisers. This past weekend, they were out in the rain collecting shoes. This year will mark the 20th golf outing they have hosted for the community. For the last 25 years, the Franklin Educational Foundation has lived its mission by supporting our educators in maximizing student experiences, and we are very grateful for their support. So emotional. So if the members of that Franklin Education Foundation who are here this evening would please come forward, and then my photographer could take maybe some pictures, I'd be quite happy. And then Mr. Sprague would like to hand over this small token of our appreciation. Thank you. Applause. I'll get in too. We're good. We're good. We'll get it together. Comment? Please do.
Hello, my name is Vicki Cordani, and I'm the Executive Director of the Franklin Educational Foundation. I've been involved with the foundation for about 6 years, and looking at the group that's represented here from the foundation has had a long legacy. Angela Beer and Jess Kent were previous board presidents. Laura Martin is our current president. Steve Cavadeas is our current treasurer. We have Mary Yank and Dr. Patricia Golden representing our board tonight. And like Dr. Miller said, we've adjusted over the past years to adjust to the needs of the district. We worked tirelessly with Molly and Lori this year and collecting masks in our mask drive and making sure that all of our students had masks as well. We loved Crohn's, that was great. And just different items like the shoe drive and helping all the NHS kids get some volunteer hours in a year where it was very difficult. So we've definitely switched our focus to a lot more community service and student services, teacher service, and we will continue to work directly with the district and enjoy doing it. So thank you so much.
It's great to have such support from the community and to be able to recognize that with our Friends of Franklin recognition and awards. Item B on the reports agenda is the Principal Action Plan update for Forest Park Middle School. Ms. King.
All right, hi everybody. So good to see you all, or at least your eyeballs. You had to make it, it's a bigger circle than usual to get all the way around. So hi, I'm Erin King. I am the principal of this beautiful building. Thank you for having us here this evening. We are also glad to host you this evening. Along with me, I have Mr. Jake Miziak and Ms. Alejandro Valle-Krolik, and I hope I pointed over the right shoulders. And we are going to give you a little bit of information about what we've been up to at the middle school. And I'm going to pass it quickly to Alejandro. We are going to ask that you have something to write with and a pencil and something to write on. I only tell you that because I know sometimes you might move so you can access or see the presentation, unless you all have it on your devices. I'm not sure.
Good evening. Sounds good. I'm ready. During our last PD on March 26th, we reminded teachers that when we come back from break, we would only have 45 days left with students. Think about that, 45 days. You're probably thinking, 45 days? What can I do in that time? The reality is, there's so much you can do in 45 days. For example, did you know that you can sail around the world in 45 days? The record is actually 40 days. You could also train for a 10K. There are so many transformational things that can happen in 45 days. The important thing is to come into those days with a plan to maximize every opportunity available. And that's what our teachers are doing. We reviewed our learning goals and our current state on the Professional Development Day, which we will do with you briefly. And as a result, teachers were able to make a specific plan and set specific intentions. Now is when you'll need the writing utensil and the paper. So before we present our action plan, we would like to challenge you to think about an intention or goal for yourself. What can you do in 45 days? What can you work towards? This can be related to your health, to your wellness, or even a leisure activity. Take a moment to think and craft an intention or goal. When you're done, turn to the person next to you and share that with them. We would also like to encourage everyone in the audience, especially our principal colleagues, to also engage in this activity. If you don't have a writing utensil, feel free to use your phone. So take a moment now and do that.
Did you want us to chat with one another right now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Chad.
Oh, it does work. Look.
All right, thank you very much. As teachers built their plan for the next 45 days, teachers considered the needs of their students, the learning they have engaged in throughout the year, and our building goals. Sorry, Chad, it's not working now. Oh, there it did. I'm going to take you through our board report and highlight our goals, some key actions we have taken, and our progress. On page 1 of the board report, you can see our building SLO is to raise student achievement in the areas of math and reading by 5%. In January, we took the winter MAP assessments to formatively assess our students' progress. We utilized the data from that assessment to engage in conversations with teachers about trends that they could identify in their classrooms and what that data told them about where they should go next. From the data, teachers could identify students who may not be growing at the rate they had anticipated, and we talked about strategies and next steps we might take to accelerate their growth. Additionally, teachers could identify students who are demonstrating significant growth, and we talked through what they might do to continue to challenge those students. In our conversations with teachers, the actions teachers identified were directly linked to the key actions you can see on page 2. To impact student growth, we've focused all year long on developing student efficacy through making sure students can orient themselves in their learning, understand what they can do when they get stuck, and how to support one another through collaboration and providing feedback. Another key action you can see on page 2 is related to our teachers working as professional learning communities to discuss and understand what we want students to learn and how we respond to students when they struggle. Whoa, Chad, it worked. Our other goal area is related to employee engagement and making Forest Park a better place to work. As we mentioned during our previous board report, we have challenged teachers each month to recognize their growth and to think about how they might continue to grow in their practice. As you can see on page 3, we focused on building two-way communication and providing teachers with feedback that helps them grow. Additionally, we focused on recognizing and acknowledging excellent work. We have used different venues to acknowledge their work, including providing teachers with a way to recognize their colleagues, pictured on the right, and by providing families a way to recognize their teachers. Our efforts in these areas have been measured by the formative data you see on page 4 of the report. And you can see we have continued to make progress, and we are proud of the progress we have made in providing our employees with valuable feedback and receiving recognition for their work. To start our presentation, Alejandra asked you to write down a goal for the next 45 days. I have shared with you some of the key actions we've taken to move towards our goals. Now I would like you to take a moment and think about and write down a couple of key actions you could take in the next 45 days to achieve the goal you wrote down.
All right, so Alejandra really started off with that 45-day goal and intention, and Jake built on to the action plan. So I'm going to share with you some of the work that our teachers did engage in their plans for the next 45 days. Chad, I'm just going to say your name instead of trying to click it, okay? One of our teachers has focused on her development as it relates to activating students in their learning and leaned into the ownership of their own learning. Throughout her coaching cycle, professional development, and consistent reflection, she was able to learn more about what activation is, why it's important, how to recognize it in her students, and specific strategies to use while striving for this with her students. Now, in these last 45 days, she is proud to be able to move into a new focus of collaboration strategies. Her goal in this quest is to pair students in collaborative partnerships in which they can develop norms, serve a role, and accomplish their learning goals together. She has developed a structure to allow students to access the learning goals, activities, and resources needed in order to make decisions about their learning. Ultimately, she is excited to see what heights her students can reach when they have productive collaboration as part of their daily learning experience. One of our teams is focused on the utilization of formative assessment data and One of our teams is focused on the utilization of formative assessment data to provide feedback to students across various levels of learning at surface, deep, and transfer. On the screen are some examples of the success criteria clearly communicated with students as they consider themes from characters and as they analyze author's craft. As a team, they are committed to bringing student work samples to their PLC in order to identify where students are as it relates to making progress towards a standard, determining which strategies to use with which students, and when to use those strategies, and ultimately know why they would use those strategies. This team also noted that they will do this by planning small groups collectively while remaining committed to phase 4 in our PLC framework, where they reflect and create improvements to impact student learning. Another one of our teachers, she is committed to providing specific feedback to students through coaching conversations as it relates to their individual progress. The teacher focuses on what techniques are already strengths for the student in order to provide feedback based on the success criteria for the unit. Students are then encouraged to make immediate improvements to their work based on their learning. As you can see, even though it's pretty difficult on the screen, you can see the examples. The teacher can clearly see her impact of her feedback on student learning as they grow throughout their learning process. Lastly, one of our teachers is focused on developing student self-efficacy through goal setting. The teacher routinely works with students in order to develop goals that are specific and individualized. The teacher asks the students to develop goals related to those intended outcomes. She then asks the students, what can you do tomorrow to move closer to your goal? Alejandra asked you to consider what you can do in 45 days, and Jake asked you to consider the action steps you could take to reach your goal. I ask that you take a moment, and all of our colleagues behind me to take a moment and think about what you can do tomorrow to move closer to the goal, and write that down, and then again share with that partner you touched base with at the beginning. And when you're ready, go ahead and chat. That'd be good. As you enter your next 45 days, we hope that you're able to use the action steps and ask yourself what you can do tomorrow to continue to move closer to your goals, as our teachers will continually do that for all of our students in order to ensure sufficient progress is made throughout the end of the year. And that is what we have, and we thank you very much. Do you have any questions for us?
Any questions from the board members?
With regard to page 2 of the report, what happens between 7th and 8th grade that makes the numbers go down as they do? It seems like this happens frequently at that point in time. And the numbers have gone from, numbers go from 70% to 55%.
Sure, and this is cohort data. So this is just one cohort of students. It's not trends over time. If you look at the trends over time for our 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we tend to stay, we're on a slight upward trend, but these are cohort data. And so it's specific to that group of 350 students.
I understand that, but it seems like this is it's at 7th grade or 8th grade, there's a peak, and then we go down. And then we go back up a little bit at the end. What happens?
Yeah. So
I realize this is just one. I realize this is one group, but
yeah,
the numbers seem to be similar.
The proficiency level, Mike, at each level obviously starts to ramp up, right? And sometimes at certain grade levels, there are bigger jumps than others. And so you're just seeing kind of the student performance in relation to some of those increases that are occurring, right? And so there are just certain grade levels over time where we start to see that jump occur. And so we, obviously we want to see all our students perform at the highest level possible. But grade level to grade level changes in the standardized assessment account for some of that.
Another question, you mentioned, some very specific student things that you do. Are these action plans at the student level or at the classroom level, or?
Great question. So we have our building action plan, and then teachers each have their own SLO, so student learning outcome, and they have their own PPG, which is their professional goal. So as we have led professional development throughout the year, we have challenged individuals, but departments really to work together. And so different departments are in different places, different individuals are in different places. So some classrooms, there are individual students maybe with specific plans. The goal, our focus has really been building that self-efficacy. So different teachers go about that in different ways because there's multiple different ways to do that. Our goal, as I mentioned earlier, is selecting strategies for certain students in certain situations and ultimately knowing why we're going to do that. So it's not a clear-cut answer, Linda, because the goal would be to get to a point where kids can own their learning. They're able to answer those 3 feedback questions of where am I now, where am I going, and where to next. So ultimately, that would be their individual plan if they know where they're at with their learning as it relates to the standard, what they can do next, and what would come after that.
Can you just give an example of some of these strategies that you're talking about?
Sure, so there's so many, but as we look through orientation is the first step towards building student self-efficacy. So there's a lot of teacher clarity there, and that's where on a few slides back, there was some success criteria that students know exactly what it means to identify the author's craft. Because if I asked you guys to read a passage and analyze the author craft moves, you might each pull out something totally different, and some of you might say, I don't know what you even mean by that. And so we're really clear with students in order to look at the techniques and goals that a writer might be using to convey their point to the reader, or how do they develop the theme with leaning in and using the characters and the actions they take to be able to convey that theme. And so instead of just being really broad with the standard for students, we ask teachers to really break it down in a clear way for students to understand really complex work.
It looks complex.
It is. They do great work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item C is our 2021-22 school year learning program. Dr. Miller.
Okay, I'm gonna probably sit a little sideways so I can see things, but I'll try to make sure I'm using the mic properly. So good evening again. Tonight, the directors and I will be sharing with you our instructional plan for the 2021-22 school year. We ask that you allow us to go through the entire report and hold your questions till the end. Before I do begin, I would first like to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who's made it possible for us to accomplish all that we've accomplished this school year. Our leadership team is here tonight and has worked tirelessly. Our teachers have been extremely loyal to our students, and all of our support staff has done everything and anything we've asked them to do. Finally, none of what we have accomplished this year would have happened without the support of the Board of Education, our school nurses, the Franklin Health Department, and our medical advisors, and of course, our families. The word I can't stop using for all that's happened is remarkable. It has truly been remarkable how we've all persevered through a historic worldwide pandemic. Those of you who know me well know that I often say, in order to know where you're going, you have to look back and see where you've been. So let's start there. On March 13, 2020, Governor Evers closed all Wisconsin K-12 schools. Like every other school district in the state, we were not prepared. But we got prepared. Within 48 hours, we took a 50-year-old educational system and converted it into something entirely different: at-home virtual learning. Fortunately, Franklin was well equipped with the technology, and our teachers had some knowledge about how to use a Google platform to teach. It literally took everyone to pull this off. Working from home, we had meetings after meeting and delivered a quality educational experience to our students for what we thought at the time might have been just a few weeks. That, of course, wasn't the case. After several weeks had passed, we continued to improve what we could, and then we began to make our plans for fall. Come summer, we were working diligently to find ways to bring our students back to school. Our first step, however, was to find out from our families what went well and what didn't from March to June. Dr. Cohn will now share with you the survey sent to families that served as our first step in building our plan to return to school this year.
As Dr. Miller shared, as we moved into the summer, it was important that we collected as much feedback as possible as we started to think about what our ultimate plans for fall were going to be. This started for us in June as we provided a survey to families to get their feedback on the at-home learning program from the spring, as well as start to get their thoughts on the types of mitigation protocols they would like to see if we were going to return to in-person instruction in the fall. In July, as we continued to consider what type of programming we'd offer and whether or not we would provide virtual programming to our families as an option, we sent a family survey home asking the question, if available to all students without a medical note, would you be interested in committing to a fall virtual learning option? Over 3,000 respondents over the course of that month sent us their feedback. And as you can see, for the most part, the community responses were split about 50-50 between those that wanted a virtual option for families and those that did not. As a result of all of that information, we started to think about the type of programming we were going to offer, particularly in regards to a virtual option. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reuter to talk a little bit about what that programming entailed.
So as we embarked on a new school year, and we get a refresh every year of how we start the school year, we've traditionally opened our doors to all students. The data that Dr. Cohn referenced from that survey, we started on August 6th an actual enrollment process for virtual learning, something that we had never done here in Franklin Public Schools. Close to 1,000 students signed up for our 4K through 12 virtual learning program. And in collaboration with Teaching and Learning Department, Human Resources, and Student Services, we embarked on developing the virtual program. You've seen this visual. We used it in our Reopening Doors presentation in the fall, and we've used it continually throughout the year in communications from Mr. Kafka to families. Our first option for parents, and nearly 4,000 students participated in, was our in-person program. Though that may sound simple, we'll just open our doors like we always did. The board is aware that you are updated throughout the year on what our in-person learning program looked like based on mitigation factors. We were able to provide all of our programming, though some programming had limitations in the in-person environment, specifically because of the safety protocols we put in place, but we were able to offer from 4K through 12th grade all board-approved programming. We had a typical, in collaboration with our principals and our system specialists and our teaching staff, we were able to think about what works in education and best practices and adapt those practices in order to be in a safe environment to ensure that the kids who selected to come into our buildings could stay in our buildings. Though we know, and you'll hear later in this report, we did have to shut down classrooms across the system at the elementary level as well as our high school for a period of time. When that happened, we didn't want to just send kids home. We wanted to send them home with the ability to continue to learn at the best of their ability and our abilities. So when we closed down classrooms at the elementary level, we shifted to an at-home learning model where the teacher was able to provide virtual instruction to that cohort of students through the Google Classroom. We learned a lot from the last spring on what was working and what did not work when we did have to shift to that shutdown during the spring. So at the middle and high school level, we were able to offer at-home learning through a repository of information for kids to engage in, and then specific time set aside for teachers to connect with kids at home. Our virtual option was a brand new option. We've never had a virtual school in Franklin Public Schools, and now our population of 1,000 students from 4-year-olds to 18-year-olds were asking for that. We developed a style of learning through a virtual environment that was different than maybe you've seen in the news of our surrounding districts. We know the greatest impact in education on the social, emotional, and academic outcomes for kids is a teacher, a live teacher. Using, similar to what Mrs. King and the middle school team talked about tonight, research-based practices, evidence-based practices that impact outcomes for kids. So we aligned with the work of Ms. Ellihausen's department, realigned and looked at our staff who was interested in teaching in a fully virtual, synchronous, live environment, not an environment where kids would remote into classrooms and hope to catch the lesson or see what the teacher was doing, or just a repository of work where kids could engage in activities and then be done for the day. But a virtual learning model where, let's say, a 5th grader followed the same schedule that an in-person 5th grader would follow, received all of the core content areas through our curriculum, the curriculums you've adopted and approved, and the standards you've approved, and also those elective areas. So the elementary model really mirrored the in-person model, just that I was fortunate to be in many of those classrooms early on to see what was going on, just that some kids were sitting on their bed learning about number bonds and reading about nonfiction book clubs. At the middle and high school level, it did pose some challenges given the array of opportunities that we have and the extensive courses. We knew we could not offer everything to fidelity that the in-person kids were able to access. You think about, how do we replicate this beautiful tech ed space back here in someone's home? Same at the high school. Some of the unique courses that you've approved over the years just don't lend themselves to a highly successful virtual environment. So in coordination with the middle school administrative team and the high school administrative team, we took our existing course catalogs, scaled those back, and then had to start over the process of the master schedule at the middle and high school. To give you an example of the undertaking of that work, currently we're in the process for building next year's schedule. That starts in about January. And we're done right before school starts. There's always tweaks and changes. On August 7th, August 13th, the day after the survey closed, we had to rebuild not only a virtual schedule at the middle and high school level, but we had to rebuild the in-person, as we had a population that we had thought we anticipated would be in-person or not. But we did it, and we were able to provide options first semester for both middle and high school students that were mandatory by state statute. So at the middle school, we still ran a 2-person house model in the virtual environment. We offered physical education, was mandatory for all students, 6th through 8th grade. art and music education was mandatory for 6th graders, and it was offered at the discretion of the child if they so chose in 7th and 8th grade. At the high school level, all courses that have been approved for you as graduation requirements were offered, and our core area classes were offered with electives based in the core. So that did limit the participation in things such as music, business personal finance took place, but family consumer science, project lead the way courses, those type of things were not offered to the virtual environment. We did find great success this year, and we continue as we look in our rearview mirror to move forward to next year. We take the learning and the things that went well and the areas that we know we can improve to engage in our future work as we continue to present this evening. So I'll turn to Mrs. Cody to speak a little bit about student services and how they're wrapped around that universal learning to support all kids' needs.
Yeah, so as Dr. Reuter mentioned, it really took a lot of collaboration and consideration of ways to meaningfully engage all of our students. And when we think about student services, the type of support that we provide includes students with IEPs, students with 504s, English language learners, students with medical plans, and also students who receive interventions in academic areas or social and emotional areas as well. So leading up to the school year, each one of those professional groups really needed to consider ways to fully transition students with all of these individual plans. So prior to the school year starting, the case managers of students with IEPs reached out to every family on their caseload and talked about how they felt their students did when they were engaging in virtual learning in the spring, what kind of impact they thought that would have on their student leading into the school year, and also what did they see as needs, just in order to support their student as they transition back to in-person. Our English language teachers did the same thing with their students as well. So we had a lot of professionals just really consider ways to bring students back in person, or if they were going to be working and learning virtually, think about how to meet their needs in unique ways. And when you think about the diverse and some of the very complex needs that our students bring to the table on a day-to-day basis, sometimes it's very complex work and takes some pretty intricate planning when you have a student working with you every day. So transitioning to this model, we really had to rethink again the in-person supports that we provided, just considering like our mitigation measures, as well as how to really fully engage students with very diverse needs still through that virtual platform. So I give our teachers, our staff members a lot of credit because they were very creative, very reflective, and very collaborative. And when I think about collaboration, that means that they worked very closely with family members as well as all of the members of a student's team, which when you think about special education, that could be an occupational therapist, speech therapist, physical therapist, cross-categorical teacher, EL teacher. So there are a lot of different people involved. So we took what we learned in the spring as far as what was really essential for students and what was effective, and then tried to build upon that. And then, like Dr. Reuter said, really think about research-based, evidence-based practices. So we talked a lot about, again, how to serve students in a way that's meaningful for them and personalized, and then also going back to the research, like what do we know about student learning. So when it came to the services for in-person, again, we really were able to provide services as we had in the past. But one thing that staff members, as they were working with students, needed to pay a little closer attention to was the need for additional services, because things were different in the spring. So part of that was just getting to know their students very quickly, understanding what their needs were, and then closely monitoring that progress as we started the school year. So there were a lot of teachers that had additional meetings with families to ensure that we understood where the students were and if they needed additional services. When it came to virtual learning, there again, it took, like I said, creativity and collaboration. So we had to go back and revisit individual student plans and then make adjustments to those plans based on that virtual learning environment. And again, I'm just amazed with the work that our teachers really did and what our students have been able to accomplish in that virtual environment. So when they think about, just think about it for a minute, when you're used to being in a classroom with a student and you can come alongside a student and check in with them and give them support and then step away, it's a little bit different trying to do that in a virtual environment when there are 25 other students on the screen. So again, it's just rethinking how we do things. And then there were other opportunity or times when we had students where we couldn't either have them fully virtual or fully in person. So there again, teams came together and supported students in kind of a hybrid model where they would come in and receive certain services in person. And then again, in partnership with families, kind of work out a unique plan that meets their individual needs. So in addition to those direct services, all of our students, virtual and in person, continue to have access to all of our on-site services as well. So our school psychologists continue to stay engaged with families. Our school counselors, our social workers were a little bit busier this year. And then we also reminded families that they have access to CPA, which is our on-site counseling. So that is how we served our, that's how student services continue to enhance the experience for our students this year.
Our plan to return the majority of our students to in-person learning also led us to continue our planning for universal mitigation protocols needed to keep our staff and students safe at school. Protocols were developed in conjunction with our health advisors as well as our district leadership team. Ultimately, the district began the year with the following protocols you see on this slide. Throughout this year, we have maintained consistency in these protocols. At times, that wasn't easy, but doing so has allowed us to mitigate the spread of COVID and keep our schools open this year. Another very important factor in our success in keeping our schools open has been the positive relationship that exists between the Franklin Health Department and our school district. In addition, we formed a medical advisory team that meets regularly. Members of this team include Dr. Patricia Golden. Dr. Golden is the Regional Medical Director for Ascension Medical Group. Dr. Ken Stalecki. Dr. Stalecki is a pediatrician with Children's Wisconsin. Ms. Courtney Day. Ms. Day is Franklin's Director of Health and Human Services. And of course, our two very capable nurses, Ms. Molly Call and Ms. Lori O'Neill. We work with this team to learn more about the spread of COVID and collaborate on best practices to keep our students safe at school and staff. One key area of mitigation is quarantine. The Franklin Health Department is the official entity that issues a quarantine. The school district does not. The school district's role is to identify those close contacts and communicate that quarantine period. This process has involved a number of resources, and Mr. Kafka will explain the process. There.
So as Dr. Miller teed up there, we are alerted about a positive case in the district. We immediately go into our contact tracing protocols that involves administrators at our buildings, our nurses. We whittle down and figure out what other students have been in close contact to that positive case. So we put this together, and then from there, we message out to our families utilizing some of our tools, PowerSchool, School Messenger. We blast that message out to those families saying that your son or daughter has been identified as a close contact, and that email contains the exposure date, the quarantine period, the return to school time frame. So that's one piece of the communication that families receive. The next piece is when the student is getting close to returning, and we now have currently the 10 and the 14-day process. So around day 10, the families get a message We keep track of all of our students as they're out, and each day we're sending messages to families of those students that are planned to return tomorrow. And that involves a screening form that the parents have to fill out, saying that they are monitoring their child for symptoms. As long as they don't have any symptoms, they're allowed to return on that day 11. If they choose to, they can also elect to keep their child out through day 14 if they want to elect for a 14-day quarantine period. And then we also subsequently send messages on days 11, 12, 13, 14. This is all in conjunction with our agreement with the health department. We do those protocols because that's the best way we can educate our parents to monitor their children for those, for the screening for COVID, so that hopefully positive cases are not coming to school. So that's a little bit about the logistics behind the scene and how we get those messages out. One other piece that we do weekly is we put out this community dashboard where we share some of our metrics, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cohn to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as Mr. Kafka said, one of the things that was really important once we had in place the ability to both quarantine students and to return them to school was to set some metrics that we were going to use to identify the relative health of the school and the district, and to identify at which points it might be necessary for us to pivot an entire school or maybe even the district over to an at-home learning environment for a period of time. And so in conjunction with the Franklin Health Department, we identified some key metrics that we were going to monitor. We built a fairly robust internal dashboard in our Qualtrics system and monitored that information on a daily basis. Perhaps one of the most important metrics for us was our 14-day cumulative positive case percentage. Again, in conjunction with the Franklin Health Department and looking at the research, we set a 3% threshold for positive cases, cumulative over 14 days, as a potential trigger point for us to move a school to at-home learning for a period of time. And so that became a central metric for us to monitor and watch. Alongside that, in order to make sure that we were transparent in our communication around where we stood as a district and as schools, as Mr. Kafka said, we published this dashboard externally. It was updated twice a week and published on our website, where we broke down not only the number of positive cases as well as quarantines that were currently active, but also looked at those key trigger points, including the community burden rate and that 14-day cumulative positive case percentage. And then we broke that down by school and for the whole district and color-coded it for ease of reference. What you see here is a table showing the cumulative impact of COVID on our schools in terms of positive cases and quarantines over the course of the year, whereas in the report, the information you saw was updated through mid-March. This information is updated as of today, and so these numbers are slightly different than the ones that were published in the report. To this point, we've had 100 staff positive cases, 364 student positive cases. That student positive case represents about 7% of our overall student body. We've had 238 staff quarantines and 2,922 student quarantines. Those quarantines represent students and staff who were quarantined both for external contacts and internal contacts, and it also represents staff and students who were quarantined more than once. And so that's the cumulative total. Our student quarantine numbers, as it's stated in the report, that were a direct result of in-school contact, were slightly above 2,200 or in that ballpark. And of those students, one of the things that we closely monitored was the secondary transmission rate. So if a student was quarantined due to an in-school contact, we wanted to know what percentage of those students contracted COVID as a result of those contacts in school and as a result of that quarantine. That rate sat at about 1.7% of all of those quarantines resulted in a positive case. And so the mitigation efforts were effective in mitigating that spread and keeping those positive rates for secondary transmission low. Additionally, at the elementary level, there were 41 classrooms that ended up pivoting to an at-home learning environment due to a quarantine and positive case. 32 of those pivoted one time, 8 of them pivoted twice, and 1 classroom ended up pivoting 4 times over the course of the year. At the high school level, we had one instance where the high school had to pivot to at-home learning for an extended period of time, and that was when we started to spike a little bit in terms of our positive case percentage in November, pushing the high school above that 3% threshold, and then pivoting that entire school for a period of time. This chart shows that progression of 14-day cumulative positive cases over time. Again, that red line at the top, that's the 3% threshold that we set. You're going to see that the district numbers obviously never went above that 3% threshold, and that's the reason the entire district didn't need to pivot at any point. And you're going to see that there were a couple of spikes, right? You're seeing that November spike that led to the high school pivoting for a period of time. You're going to see another secondary spike right around mid-January. But outside of that, the overall case rate remained relatively flat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Milzer and Ms. Ellihausen. We're going to talk a little bit about the fiscal impact of all of that programming.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Milzer and I are indeed going to speak to the fiscal impact of the program. But before we do, I would like us all to just pause. Digest everything you just heard. Appreciate the story. Think about the 15-month story. It is quite an epic novel. We have a lot of twists and turns, great character development. It's a bit of drama, a little bit of action, mystery, which sometimes led to comedy, which often led to horror. But there was never really any romance. But it's really quite a novel. Jim and I are last for a very important reason. As a team, our input is equally valued, but our role is to focus on support within reason and limit, to not allow the dollars to drive the decisions you heard, and really to find the reasons why we can make work what is best for our kids. So you heard Dr. Miller talk about the vastly changing information coming from many sources. Dr. Cohn talk about gathering input from our families. Dr. Reuter talk about the fundamental non-negotiable that our learning program had to meet those varying needs and yet not compromise on the quality of academics we are so very proud of here in Franklin. Ms. Cody addressed the services to support that program. Throughout this journey, our character development was really quite profound. All of us, from employees to students to families, we earned a lot of badges in resilience and compassion and agility and so many more. And nobody ever took lightly the trust that was placed in us to ensure everyone's safety, from the 5,000 kids to the over 10,000 parents and over 800 employees that come to work every day, as well as our community of 36,000. So now we can look at some of the numbers. And as you hear me first address some of the driving expenditures of this past year, why, as they should be, they were in people or labor. With almost 1,000 students in a virtual classroom environment and almost 4,000 in person, we had to move quickly over that short time frame of last summer to really ensure we could be ready by the start of the year. There are two key pieces, and that's mitigation and programming. So you heard words like structured movement patterns, cohorts of students, symptom monitoring, and quarantining. You also heard replication of our in-person program to ensure our virtual students were receiving the highest quality education possible. But you also heard that sometimes flipping of classrooms was required. So the personnel costs exceed $1 million to make all of those things happen. When you look at that column over there, why? We had to plan. We had to plan, and we needed the right people in the room to help plan, to support the teaching staff be ready for the start of the year. We knew that our teaching staff were going to do work like they have never done work before. So we needed to take off some of those responsibilities and really increase our support staff to ensure supervision, to really make sure that cohorts were happening the way they needed to happen, whether that was before school, after school, or during lunch. We definitely had to have hours added to support those protocols around contact tracing and quarantining, and increase our nursing staff and our office assistants to make sure that kids that were ill were being treated in appropriate manner, and that we were moving as quickly as we could to ensure that safety protocols were in place. And then with respect to the teaching staff, if you remember back to my October 2020 staffing report, I'm sure you all have that memorized, right? We added over 8 FTE. But remember, we had to net out our normal programming for those in-person students as well as the virtual program to really see where our difference lied. And that last number there is that add of the teaching FTE that you heard me speak to in that October report. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Milzer. He'll talk about the non-personnel and then the revenue expenses.
We divided the non-personnel expenses into 4 categories. Under teaching and learning costs, we had virtual resources that needed to be purchased, as well as class libraries. Under sanitizing, there were a lot of sanitizing supplies, machines for sanitizing, sanitizer for buses, plexiglass partitions. It was the first time we had ever bought sanitizing liquid by the 55-gallon drum. HVAC upgrades, we bought 8 new HVAC units, and we replaced any drinking fountain in the district that did not have a bottle filler on it with one that did. And under technology, we have Chromebooks and related software and supplies that we purchased to make sure everyone could be virtual, as well as technology needs for the virtual teachers. So you can see in total our expenses were $1.9 million. And looking at our revenue, we received a bit of library aid, $25,000, and then it shows ESSER 1 funds. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. These are federal funds specifically for the school pandemic expenses, and they're distributed through the Title I formula, which is based on poverty levels. And the district has to spend these funds before they get reimbursed for it. So in the first wave, we got $257,000. ESSER 2 is really just starting, and we know that we will get about $1 million through the Title I allocation. The Department of Public Instruction had a plan to give every district enough money to get at least $395 per student, but that had to be approved by the Joint Finance Committee. They did not approve that. They came up with a plan to give that money to schools based on how many hours students were in class with an instructor. So in order to find out what we were going to receive, we have to wait till the end of the year. Every district has to send their information in, and it will probably be fall before we know what that number is. We're estimating about $800,000 for that. And looking at open enrollment, actually open enrollment out to a virtual school, we had 41 students last year that left the district for a virtual school and established virtual school prior to us starting our virtual program. So we had a negative revenue of $333,000. As you know, negative revenue is really a bad kind of revenue. So we had a total revenue of $1.7 million. And as we look at the difference there, expenses were more than revenue by $235,000, which we'll be covering within our regular budget.
As we move forward, we're incredibly optimistic. While there's still a great deal of uncertainty, we know so much more than we did when we opened school last fall. This fall plan is based upon that learning, the current state of COVID, and the advice of our medical professionals as to what COVID may look like moving forward. The following priority areas were our starting point last fall when we set out to reopen our doors, and they'll continue to be our focal points this school year, each equally important to ensuring that Franklin Public Schools continues to get better. We continue to use credible resources to inform our decisions. These resources provide information and guidelines that our internal medical advisory team discusses in the context of our school district. As I previously stated, we need to look back to look forward. Beginning with what we learned, the following represents our experience with transmission, testing, and vaccination distribution during this school year. The highest number of positive COVID cases within the district and community occurred in the months of October and November. Disease rates increased briefly at the start of 2021, followed by a steady decline in testing numbers, positive cases, and overall disease rate from mid-January through March. As of this April, data related to testing and disease burden plateaued, and there was a small uptick in positive cases within Franklin and throughout the state. With regard to testing, COVID testing availability and the turnaround times have dramatically improved. There are now various locations within or close to Franklin offering valid test results within 24 hours. A vaccine is now available, and as of April 5th, many Franklin school employees have received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. All staff that would like to be vaccinated have been offered the opportunity to do so through the district's partnership with Ascension. And as of April 5th, children ages 16, 17, and 18 are now able to receive the COVID vaccine if they choose. The CDC has continued to adjust its recommendations for schools and has become more and more apparent that schools have served students in person have not been a significant cause of the spread of COVID. Simply stated, the impact of the virus is expected to be smaller in fall than it was a year ago. What we do expect for this fall is that COVID will continue to circulate with intermittently higher rates within the community and throughout the state, which may be the result of non-vaccinated individuals or different COVID variants. CDC and the Wisconsin DHS continue to upgrade their guidance for isolation and quarantine for those who've had COVID within the last 90 days and for those who are fully vaccinated. We're also expecting to see the results of the current vaccine trials down to age 12. Pfizer and Moderna are optimistic that children down to age 12, perhaps the vaccine will be available in late summer or fall. In summary, and in consultation with our medical advisory team, we have conducted our planning with the following 6 assumptions in mind. Number 1, all adults and students 16 and over who want to access a vaccine are eligible to receive it. There may not be a vaccine for children under the age of 16 by fall. Future COVID variants will continue to be mitigated by the vaccine. As recommended by the CDC and DHS, mask wearing, social distancing, and disinfection will still be required in schools because children will not be vaccinated. In collaboration with the Franklin Health Department, we'll continue to contact trace positive cases as well as isolate, quarantine impacted staff and students. And finally, we will continue to follow the recommendations and guidelines provided by the WIAA and the Franklin Health Department with regards to how athletics and activities will be conducted. So utilizing these assumptions, the mitigation planning for 2021-22 answers the following key questions. Which mitigation protocols should be modified and in what way? What mitigation protocols should be eliminated? And finally, which mitigation protocols from this year should continue to the start of the next school year? As we move forward with our planning for our instructional program next year, we therefore intend to start the 2021-22 school year with the following mitigation protocols in place. We'll continue with protocols that support contact tracing. Students at Forest Park and Franklin High School will have assigned classroom seats. We will move to assigned seats or groups of students in elementary classes in order to move away from placing an entire class in quarantine. We'll continue with assigned seats on our buses and will allow for increased capacity. Finally, we'll continue to incorporate distancing and cohorts of students during lunch and continue to use assigned seats. We'll continue to use our symptom screening and monitoring. Students and staff with symptoms of illness will be screened by nursing services to determine an appropriate timeline for return to a building. And we'll continue to exclude any person who we suspect of having COVID. We'll also continue with our online attendance screening form. Our district will continue with sanitation and disinfection procedures. We'll teach and reinforce hand hygiene and practices for cough etiquette and provide our students and staff with an ample quantity, 5-gallon drum, of sanitizer and surface cleaner. There'll be regular cleaning and disinfection of large learning spaces in general. However, we do intend to eliminate repeated cleaning of areas outside the classroom. Our lunch tables will be disinfected between lunches. We'll restrict the use of our drinking fountains and utilize our bottle fillers instead, and we'll consistently ensure that we are utilizing proper ventilation within all of our school buildings. With regard to personal protective equipment, it will include staff and students continuing to wear masks until such time the CDC, DHS, and/or the Franklin Health Department deem it as a non-essential mitigation protocol. And then we'll provide additional personal protective equipment to medical responders in our schools and staff that work in high-risk roles. We'll continue to offer our recreation programming and athletic activities. In doing so, we'll follow all WIAA guidelines and the quarantine protocols of the Franklin Health Department. And then we intend to continue to build upon our growing recreation programs with the advice of the Franklin Health Department. Finally, we'll continue to provide options to limit gatherings by offering a virtual option for parent meetings, such as conferences or IEPs or 504 meetings. And we'll continue to limit staff business travel between buildings and multi-building meetings, and meet virtually when the outcome or quality is not impacted. Knowing what the protocols will look like, our next step in the planning process was to build our instructional program. Dr. Cohn will now describe the data we collected to inform our decision on what that would look like.
So just as it was last July, it was equally important this year as we started to think about the fall and the programming we were going to offer, that we started to wrap our heads around the scope of what our community was looking for and what they want in terms of that programming. And so in February, as we did last July, we reached out to our families again, and this time our starting point was to ask the question, if we were to offer the same virtual learning program that we offered as an option this year for next fall, with a 1-year commitment attached to it, which of the following was true? And we asked 2 statements within that. One was, would you be more likely to enroll your child in an in-person program, or would you be more likely to enroll your child in a virtual learning program? As we did in July, we had just over 3,000 respondents, in this case 3,191, and our community was split in those responses between 93% saying we would like to return to in-person programming or enroll in in-person programming, and 6.8% saying that they would prefer a virtual program. Within that, we had to do a little bit of projecting. We didn't have all 4,700 plus families respond to the survey, and so we had to think a little bit both in terms of actual survey responses and projected survey responses. And so in column 1, you're seeing the grade level breakdown. This chart is showing you the actual numbers and the projected numbers of students who responded that they would prefer a virtual learning program identical to this year in the fall. And so column 2 are the actual respondents. So these are the actual families by grade level that indicated their child at that grade level would prefer a virtual program that mimicked this year. The column on the right then, we took that 6.8% who identified in the actual responses as preferring a virtual option, and projected that out to all of the remaining families who didn't respond to the survey. And so the right-hand column, those are projected numbers based on that 6.8%. And for us, it represented kind of a maximum threshold that we would assume we would get if all of those surveys were out in return. From there, the families, the 217 actual respondents who said that they prefer a virtual option identical to this year for their child, it was important that we got a little more information as to why that was the case. And so what you're seeing across the bottom here in the bar graph are the breakdown of those 217 responses as to why. And so left to right, 48% of those 217 indicated that they just had general COVID concerns. So there wasn't a particular medical issue in the family or with the child, but in general, they were concerned about COVID. The 24% indicated that there was a family member with a medical condition, but not necessarily the child. 12% responded that their child had a medical condition or concern. 9% indicated that they just preferred virtual learning to in-person learning generally. And then 8% indicated other. And for anyone who indicated other, we did probe a little deeper there and allowed a narrative response. The most frequent or common response in that 8% was that they didn't feel comfortable with their child wearing a mask in school. And so that was why they said that they had preferred a virtual option. From there, we took that 12% and broke that down to 12% who said that their child had a medical concern and broke that into actual numbers. And so on the right-hand side, you're seeing that that represented 10 students at the elementary level, 8 at the middle school level, and 8 at the high school level for a total of 26. From there, and with that information, I'll turn it over to Dr. Reuter to talk a little bit about the options.
So as we think about programming options, we're much further ahead than we were last year as we built a virtual school and a newly improved in-person to align with the mitigation protocols. Our first plan option this evening I'll speak through, and then I'll turn over to Mrs. Cody to speak through plan option B. In the first option, it's really a replication of what I shared earlier in this presentation. We would continue to follow the mitigation protocols for the in-person model outlined by Dr. Miller as we know more and we're more informed in our partnerships with many of the medical professionals and the recommendations from the CDC and our local health officials. So that model would look very similar to what is currently happening in our schools and how we plan to close out these last 39 days of instruction. In the case that we would have to shift to an at-home model, we would follow through with the same process we utilized this year, whether it be an entire classroom or specific students that were contact traced, and we utilize a virtual platform through Google Classroom, either provide synchronous or asynchronous instruction based on the population of students at home. Our virtual option, again, would mirror, and you saw the data that Dr. Cohn shared, by grade level. We would work in partnership with Human Resources, Student Services, and Teaching and Learning to think about how we would allocate staff and resources to serve those smaller populations that currently indicated they'd be interested in a replication of our virtual instructional program, which would mean we'd have a replication at the elementary level. However, at the middle and high school level, as I indicated before, there'd be a limitation in access to courses that just don't deem themselves to be as robust in a virtual environment, as well as the staffing needs we would not be able to participate with. So that really our plan A replicates what we did this year.
Okay, so for plan B, option 1 replicates plan A, option 1, so in person as our students are currently experiencing it. The difference here with plan B is that our goal is to bring back 100% of our students in person. But we also recognize that we do have students with pretty significant medical needs that could be seriously impacted by exposure to COVID-19. So while these conditions are few in number, there is a risk for children in which we should provide the family an option for learning virtually. So that is plan B, option 2. In order to determine eligibility for this option, the district then, in consultation with the medical advisory team, would work to create medical criteria. If a student is deemed eligible, then the family, along with their doctor, would have the option to choose this virtual program. The virtual program would be a 1-year commitment. So again, anticipating very small numbers, as you saw on the earlier slides provided by Dr. Cohn, we did see the need then to utilize an outside vendor for instruction. So Dr. Reuter and I have met, and we are working currently with an outside vendor to provide instruction that would supply online programming and a teacher of record for instruction, grading, and reporting for K-8. So we've, Dr. Reuter connected with a couple of different outside vendors and also looked at neighboring districts and what they have found successful as well. At the high school level, we would be looking at WEN, which is Wisconsin eSchools Network, and we do have students who currently are provided experiences through WEN. And WEN, too, would provide a teacher of record for instruction, grading, and reporting. Courses that mirror FPS Board of Education approved courses would be eligible for FHS students to complete a 7-course per semester schedule that's entirely online and outsourced to WEN. And again, Dr. Reuter, you have a lot of work to do here. Dr. Reuter would be working with the middle and high school in order to determine what the elective course offerings would be. And then in both the elementary and the high school virtual program, our Franklin Public Schools staff members would still provide services for students with IEPs, 504s, English language learners, and I believe that would be it. Those are all of our support staff, in partnership with the outside provider, so working with their teacher. So because the outside provider works with students from all different locations, students would be enrolled with in courses, again, with students from different districts. So just the way that we work with the virtual provider would be a little bit different. So even though they are providing the teacher of record and grading, they would still partner very closely with us to ensure that our students are following our district policies. So we would have one staff member who would be identified to really work to make sure that we have a solid partnership with those outside providers. Let's see. And then finally, if we do have students, like we typically do on a year-to-year basis, if we have students who do have a medical condition that would require them to temporarily need a change of venue for their instructional planning, like if they have surgery with a lengthy recovery or they're receiving treatment for something that does not allow them to engage in in-person learning. In those circumstances, we would follow our school board policy that focuses on homebound instruction, and we would develop an individual plan for those students.
Okay, so Mr. Moser and I again are last. When we worked with the team, it was important that we put what our families needed and what our kids needed first, and then our role to look at how does that look from a fiscal impact standpoint. Dr. Miller talked a lot about the assumptions, right? And they are just that, they are assumptions, they're the best information at this time. We know that we need to continue some of those mitigation measures because although COVID is better, it's certainly not gone. Dr. Cohn talked about what our families told us and the story of those numbers. And then you just heard Dr. Reuter and Ms. Cody talk about the learning program and that experience that we need to ensure that shapes our students every day. So what Mr. Jim and I are gonna do is we're gonna take each plan separately here and look at it. So we're gonna start with Plan A. And to your left, you see again that chart to remind you of what was that interest, what did our families tell us about interest in the programming. And what you see here is the vast majority, right, of our students are going to be returning to the in-person environment based upon that feedback.
The estimated virtual population is 293 students you see there. And again, now break that down one more time, take it across 13 grade levels from kindergarten through 12th grade. And this is where we look at all of those variables. Our staff did a phenomenal job this past year. They went all in to the models we have, the in-person model and the virtual model. And that's not to say there weren't challenges, because there were, and they were successfully supported in these environments by both our teaching and learning department, student services department, and our principals that you see in the audience here tonight. But when you look at that, you get that proud moment about that academic program and the replication of it, and you think about these numbers when you have 293, and think about them in converse, that's about 4,400 students returning to in-person. There really isn't any economy of scale like we were able to incur this past school year. So at the K-8 level, look at those numbers and you're really looking at additional classrooms. At the high school level, in order to even sustain the offerings Dr. Reuter talked about, staffing becomes very challenging when you recognize that classes might be very small cohorts of students that you then need to staff. So in order to really make this model happen, there is labor intensity to it. And you see that in the line that says additional teacher FTE. It would be estimated that there would be upwards of 25 additional teacher FTE, and that's both in the programmatic core areas as well as the support services for it. Then back up, and on the lines ahead of that number, that really big number you see there, are those mitigation measures that we need to continue. We need to continue for the in-person students, those 4,400 kids that are coming. We still need to ensure some supervision has to take place, that our educational assistants are there at the front line of that. We have some planning that would need to be done in this model, and you see that reflected in the additional days in order to really get ready for it. And then we will have to continue when you think about quarantining that will still need to take place, contact tracing that will still need to take place in the nursing staffing number you see there. So I'll turn over to Mr. Milzer to talk again about the non-personnel and the revenue.
The non-personnel expenses in this plan are somewhat less than what we experienced this year. In teaching and learning, again, for virtual resources, we're at about $37,000. Sanitizing, $63,000. In HVAC, we would be replacing about 12 HVAC units for about $270,000. And in technology, again, it would be Chromebooks and their related software and supplies for about $330,000. So that puts us at added expenses of about $3.5 million. When we look at the revenue, you can see that we have the third wave of federal funding there in ESSER 3 funds. We're estimating that that will be about $1.8 million. And then the open enrollment out, we're estimating that about half of the students that were out this year would come back to school. So that number drops to a negative $162,000 for a total added revenue of about $1.6 million. When we take a look at that, the expenses far outpace the revenue. So revenue is $1.8 million less than the expenses for this plan.
Okay, and then with respect to Plan B, which Ms. Cody spoke to, in thinking about that plan, you see again to the chart there, 26 is the estimated student population. So with such a small number of students there, the team decided that the best course of action is to really outsource or contract those academic needs of those 26 students so that they can be best tailored to meet the needs. It's the most cost-effective method to address this as opposed to internal labor or staffing costs.
We can provide many of the support services for 26 students in-house without adding layers of cost at such a small population. But really, when you look at the side of the expenditures under personnel, you see coming back again costs associated with the mitigation measures. Those number of in-person students, in order for us to adjust that, still requires what I talked about in supervision, support staff needs, as well as additional hours for nursing support. And there's planning that has to be involved, but it is less extensive than the planning for the Plan A model. And then really in this one, you see a net reduction in the additional teacher FTE, and that really is where we added from this year, looking at bringing back the number of in-person, resectioning them back. It's just a natural reduction, some increase, some decrease in the ebb and flow that results in some savings there as a result. The only real personnel costs that come, if you remember back to what Ms. Cody said, are really in some of the ways in which we contract. We'll need to have some services provided in-house that are directly associated with that contracting. And when you look at a program like WEN, our staff in-house act as coaches for the students enrolled in WEN in a very limited capacity. So that's really all that exists in my line under expenditures. And so, Jim, if you'll take the remaining expenditures and revenue.
And non-personnel, our first category of teaching and learning costs, this time is almost entirely the cost of providing those virtual classes with the outside vendors. Sanitizing, HVAC are the same as in Plan A, and technology is again Chromebooks, but it's a little bit less due to fewer virtual students. So we have total expenses of about $1 million. And then in revenue, the ESSER 3 funds stay the same, but in open enrollment out to virtual schools, based on the survey responses, we estimated a number of students in each of those categories that might leave the district for an established virtual program. And in total, we're estimating that 93 students would leave the district for one of those programs. So our open enrollment out negative revenue of $757,000. So we have the revenue of $1,056,000, and in Plan B, our revenue exceeds expenses by just over $7,000.
All right, so I'd like to conclude again by thanking our entire school community for working together to provide our students with the best possible educational experience. As we continue to focus on our priority of continuing to ensure highly effective learning in our schools, we know that our families have a strong desire for their children to learn in person. We also know that in-person learning is how children learn best. Our data indicates that 93.2% of our families are likely to send their children back next fall for in-person learning. However, given that 6.8% of our families have stated that they would likely choose a virtual option, we investigated the possibility of providing such an option. In doing so, we discovered the most challenging aspect of offering a virtual learning program next year is the low number of students, which contributes to the high cost to the district. Because most teachers will be needed now to teach in person, we can't repurpose them to teach virtually as we did this year. Therefore, a large number of new staff would be needed to be employed for extremely small classes. That said, serving the needs of our families is very important to us. There are students within our school district who have compromised immune systems that COVID-19 would seriously impact. The families of these children deserve to receive their child's education in Franklin. Working with our medical advisory team, we are confident that we will appropriately identify these students and will also be able to provide them with a high-quality learning experience. Therefore, the administration will utilize Plan B in the planning for the 2021-22 instructional program. We have demonstrated that we can successfully conduct in-person learning and will continue to mitigate COVID-19 in our schools for as long as necessary to ensure our students can be present at school every day. COVID-19 has been a lot of things. I prefer to think of it as part of our story of how we can do what we can't, story of what we can do, excuse me, and how we continue to get better. So thank you very much for listening. I'd like to thank our entire team again for being here this evening, more importantly for everything you've done to support our kids. At this time, we're happy to answer any questions, including our leadership team that's here tonight.
Just a quick question verification. So the number of students expected to leave the district was that 290, 93 or 293?
93.
How many?
93?
Oh, 93.
How did we come up with that number?
What was that number again? Total of 93 in Plan B. Right.
So that's a lot of revenue loss, though, for 93. What, I guess I got to.
It was, we looked at every one of the categories of the answers on the survey. So if they had a medical concern about themselves, they had a medical concern in their family, they just didn't like or preferred virtual learning, or they had COVID concerns, and came up with a percentage of each of those that might decide not to come back to school. Obviously, it's a huge estimate, and it could very well be different than that, but we have to make an estimate of what that is to go forward with the plan.
And then the revenue estimate is based on what, full state aid leaving us? Is that how you came with the revenue impact?
The open enrollment.
Open enrollment. I mean, obviously, there's a lot, in play, just like last year. Things can change as we go along. Looks like a solid plan to me. I just have one question in the, as I understand it, as you're going through, the virtual program gets really expensive once you get past 5th grade because of the electives. Is that correct?
In Plan A?
In general, it gets very expensive to offer a virtual program beyond 5th grade because you can't offer the range of electives, or you're trying to offer them.
If we were to replicate what we're doing this year, is that the plan you're referring to, or the Plan B plan?
Plan A, yeah.
Yeah, and even at the elementary level, and you look at the numbers, there could be a kindergarten of 14. So to allocate a full FTE to 14 versus a in-person of 20 to 25, that's a difference.
Okay. I thought at first there would be some maybe consideration to offer virtual at the lower grades, since it's not as costly, if that were the case. I guess my concern would be that we're losing these families. Will they come back? What's our assumption? This still isn't the end of the COVID. This is we're still getting to post-COVID. Will they come back? And what's the longer-term impact of losing those families?
I believe that the families would come back. Certainly in another year, I would think that we would be farther along with COVID, and that it would be safer to come back for them, at least as they viewed it. So we're not looking at this as a forever loss, just as probably a one-year loss.
Okay, thank you.
Did we see any transfer-ins this year? Did we see an increase in students transferring in because we were in person and other districts weren't?
No, I think it was probably too much happening at once during the summer, and a lot of districts thought they were going to come back in person, and then right before school started, they weren't. They went to a different model. So I think that might have stopped people from doing that. We also had filled all of our seats for open enrollment at that point.
what is the status of the open enrollment, we're talking about at the last meeting, in terms of, open enrollment students being able to, remain in the district if they, I guess that doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah, that did pass. The governor signed off on that. So our open enrollment students, if they have medical needs and need a virtual program, may remain in the district.
So the HVAC numbers of 270,000, I look back at the building and grounds report, and over the next 3 years, we're expected to spend 425,000 on each HVAC. Is that the same product that we're getting?
Yes, we would do as many of those upcoming units as possible.
So that's money that would come out of the buildings and grounds, I mean, come out of that
Or we
part of
could
the
fix
budget.
more things.
Pardon me?
Or we could fix more things with the additional funds that we aren't spending on HVAC. But yes.
In regard to the HVAC, are we going to put in something like the UVC lights that are forced air to sanitize the air that's going through the school?
Right now, we're not looking at doing that. We have talked to the vendor that does that. Would probably be about $600,000 to do that in the district. And since we've been in person all year and have not had flare-ups or big transmissions, we don't believe that that's worth that cost. And that it doesn't last forever. There's a limited time that those last and you have to replace them.
Right, but replacing a light bulb is not very expensive. They're about $20.
Oh, from that standpoint. Well,
yeah.
We have a lot of them, though.
Okay.
Anyone else?
The numbers for added EAs and added hours for health room nursing, as COVID wanes, is it possible those numbers go down over the next school year?
Absolutely. Even as we stand today, in order, again, to use the best information we have, and to really be sure that we were fiscally responsible, we used continuation of the current. But as I work with the principals this spring, and we look at the mitigation measures that are carrying over, we will heavily look at how we are using the EA hours, or the support hours, to ensure that we aren't over or understaffed. And though you may see certainly modifications in those numbers, both to start the year and then throughout the year.
Can you give us some idea of what the FTE or hours that represents?
Absolutely. So we are at 75 additional hours per day. That's across all the buildings, which results in about 14,000 hours per school year. And that is really the principals using them from supervision for before school, lunch, recess, hall, ensuring the cohort groups are sound, to the after school pieces. And at the same time, ensuring that we also have instructional support in the classrooms like we've had in the past in how we use EA hours. But the add is 75 hours a day, approximately.
Any final questions? Thank you, Dr. Miller. And the administrators, appreciate your dedication and effort. Moving on to item 9, school board liaison reports. Item 1, personnel and policy. Ms. Larson.
Thank you. We are reviewing policy 6200, curriculum development, implementation, and evaluation. This is an action item. This policy was last reviewed in November of 2013, and there are just a few minor changes. There's new language updates. There's new language that updates the goals of professional development that are tied to the curriculum implementation. And language has been added to the policy stating that the curriculum review process is posted annually on the district website. Those are the changes, and I would be looking for a motion to revise policy 6200, curriculum development, implementation, and evaluation.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Sprague,
Second.
second by Ms. Sprarsky. Any discussion?
If I could just add, I left at each of your table seats the document that will be uploaded tomorrow with approval of this policy. It outlines the curriculum review process, which all of you have seen for the last 3 years in the annual November report when you approve new courses and changes to our curriculum, as well as I've outlined an updated curriculum calendar and where we are in curriculum review process and given disciplines and departments at our various levels. You can see there's denotation based on what had to be suspended from last spring in our COVID shutdown.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
And the posting of this annually it's a great idea, or state requires us?
It's a great idea. Be public facing to our community on how we review curriculum and monitor the progress of curriculum, as well as what curriculums they can forecast might change for their child. And our staff has access and visibility for those who are not part of those stakeholder groups I often speak about.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item B, board liaison reports.
I would like to say that SWSA is really following the state budget process, and they are, hearings are currently happening with joint finance, and we did have a couple of districts testify, Milwaukee and Greendale, and there still is an opportunity to submit comments. They would like 100% participation by all districts to release submit comments. Do we have any plans to do that, or are you aware of that?
I collaborated as part of the executive committee on the talking points that we've been all asked to use to send to our legislators. So that's the role I've played so far, is to ensure that we all had the consistent talking points around what was needed in the budget. But at this point, I wasn't attending a hearing. But board members certainly could, and I could provide those talking points if necessary.
We also can submit written comments.
Yep, we can submit written.
Are we planning on doing that, or?
I primarily was going to work with our state legislators, but we certainly could. As a board, you could certainly do that. Or if you'd like me to do that, I would do that on behalf of the board. But I'd utilize those same talking points. Yeah.
I mean, they've really stressed the importance of hearing from districts in order to support the funding levels that are proposed. I was actually approached by the School Board Association to testify. It was not available. I think we should submit, if the board would concur, I think as a district we could submit some testimony to support the budget.
I'd be happy to do that if you want to give a nod. Anybody? Okay, I'd be happy to do that on behalf of the board.
Thank you.
Sure.
Very good. Anyone else?
Yep, I have 2 reports. I met with Drs. Cohn and Reuter for our monthly assessment and curriculum committee work, and heard about the state testing going on and coherence plan refresh from Dr. Cohn. Focus groups are happening right now with different stakeholder groups for that coherence plan refresh, and our board will meet at our next meeting workshop. And talking about this policy actually that we just approved was a comment with Dr. Reuter, so that was that. And then I also, I was super excited to be able to visit my board liaison school on Monday this week. I went to Ben Franklin and was able to go in and tour 2 classrooms, tour the building a little bit, but also specifically stop in 2 classrooms. I visited 2 third-grade classrooms. One was in person with students at their desks and masks on and all their equipment right at their desks, so they didn't have to move around. The other was a virtual third-grade classroom. So I was able to see the teacher who was in front of her computer with her document camera and able to, see how that was all working. But there were no students, obviously, in the classroom, just on her computer screen. But in both classes, they were talking about fractions and learning about different strategies of fractions. It was really kind of fascinating to see how it was very much the same and yet obviously different as well. So it was really neat to be able to be in the classroom though and in the school and just kind of see what the schools look like. So thank you to Ben Franklin for welcoming me. That's my report.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing none. Move on to school and community engagement reports.
I did go see the musical last week at the high school. It's nice to be in person. I know Mrs. Sapersky might be able to talk more of the musical. She was there 4 nights.
I was. In my defense, I had a student, my daughter was in the pit, so I had a reason to be there 4 nights, but I think it was a real testament to Franklin and our commitment to our students and to the community in that we were able to offer such an incredible performance opportunity for our students, but also, again, for the community, for people to be able to be there, parents, a few community members, never more than 100 people in a facility that holds 800, so it did feel very safe. But then we also had the streaming ability, and so many people around the country were able to watch our students perform. And just one of the things that we talked about was how there are Broadway performers who are not able to perform on Broadway, but our students were able to perform here in Franklin, and it was a really incredible experience.
I did stream it. It wasn't exactly the same experience, but I could appreciate the opportunity for our students and the effort that was put into it.
Anyone else? Item 10 would be going into closed session. I'm looking for a motion to enter closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C for discussion for review of district administrative performance standards and evaluation.
So
Motion by Ms. Larson,
second.
I still didn't catch which one of you. Ann?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay. Second by Ms. Sapersky. Any discussion? Could I have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Larson?
Yes, Mrs. Witkowski,
Aye.
Mr. Alexandrovich,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Sprague,
Aye.
Mrs. Sapersky.
Aye.
I vote aye. Mr. Gamble.
Aye.
Motion passes. We are in closed session.
I have reserved the room right where that gentleman's walking